Good. Got the heck out of that situation and moved on with your life, man. That's all you can do, right? Look, I really appreciate these emails, especially from the older folk, and they want to share their stories in hopes of helping someone. That was the entire intention of this channel. People using their stories to help um other people's lives. So I appreciate emails like this, man. And and you call out, you guys are holding yourselves accountable. Look, this was a red flag I missed. This was another one I missed. This was another one I missed. You know, tell your story and it's going to help a lot of people. It's going to help somebody out there. And that's the point of this channel. It
Paul's
truly is.
story, Crossroads of America. True story. Greetings from the Crossroads of America. I would like to share my personal story. You can call me by my real name, Paul. This is a pretty long story, 15-year marriage. Please bear witness. Well, here it goes. I thought it would last forever, but I never thought what it would entail. The story begins in my early 20s, 1990. I graduated high school and was working at a grocery store, and this job wasn't going to pay for my independence. So I decided to do something bold, something big. I decided to join the Army. I entered military service, graduated basic training, advanced through individual training, and reported to my first duty station, which was in Korea. I served in Korea for 14 months straight, and I returned to the States to report to my stateside assignment at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was sent for more training, which was airborne school. I completed training and returned to Fort Bragg, and that was when I met her. The night was by far not the greatest. I was drinking, and she was drinking. She ended up sleeping with another Solider in his room. It was my intention just to have a little fun with her later, but the fact that she had hooked up with this random guy and did what she did was an issue that seemed to plague me throughout the relationship. I inquired about where she worked and went there to eat and see if she was there, and we exchanged pleasantries. Later, I asked her out, and she said she would go out with me. We had a first date, and we started messing around, and she said, "If we have sex, I will never want to see you again." I do not believe in taking advantage of someone. I don't like the idea of using someone. That's just not me. And at the time, I believed in an emotional connection with someone who you want to have sex with. I know, stupid me. I didn't do anything, and we ended up just laying there and fell asleep, and I took her home the next morning. We continued to see each other, and it was close to my birthday, in which she bought an expensive gift. She barely knew me. Later, I would see this as a red flag. We ended up dating and seeing each other. With any job or career, you have obligations. But with the military, you have multiple training courses and deployments. Of course, my focus shifted from what I needed to do to her. I made that decision, and it affected my opportunities in the military. I went to a leadership course and failed the course. I didn't prepare. I didn't blame her. I blamed myself. My finances started to suffer, and my vehicle was reposed. It seems like all of my resources seemed to be draining, yet I couldn't break it off. I knew I had to, but just couldn't. And yes, this will be important later. Personal red flag. I went through a deployment. The operational tempo increased. My physical readiness suffered. Everything just suffered. I wasn't as confident in my abilities. Something I didn't understand was happening. Second red flag. I had some leave coming up, and I needed to just get away, sort some things out, and she had showed interest and said she wanted to visit her family in Michigan. I had never been there, and I decided I would take leave and we would go up together. This was in July after the 4th, so I could use that part as my leave. We went and I proposed. This was 4 months after we met. Red flag. There were deployments between the time I proposed and the time we got married in December, 9 months later. But there was a major incident during this time that, of course, caused problems in the relationship. The incident was that we were to meet a group at a popular bar. We arrived and we met the group. The bar was pretty much dead, yet there were some patrons there. Not bad. I really don't like being in a crowded bar or bars in general. We ordered some drinks and we were sitting around the table with our friends. The female that I was with kept getting up and walking around the bar and talking with a lot of people, mostly guys. It was a little later that a guy walked up and asked her to dance. She turned to me and looked at me. Should I or shouldn't I dance with him? What do I say? Do I say no? And it will be considered jealousy, then resentment from her, and I played the scenario out. She would accuse me of being controlling, and I see it as a no-win situation. If I say no, I am controlling. If I say yes, then I don't care, and I am not showing my dominance, which is a put-off. I say sure, it's a no-win situation. Red flag. My past included issues with alcohol, and I tried not to drink, but after that, I got pretty blasted, and she offered to take me home. When I got there, I laid down and got sick, then passing out. I come to around 4 a.m., and she is not there. I look around. My truck was missing. I put two and two together. She had gone back to the bar. I was not going to stand for this. I climbed out the window due to not wanting to leave the door unlocked, and I walked the 5 miles to the barracks. Later in the afternoon, around 2 p.m., that she knocks on my door. She, of course, asks what had happened. I knew in my heart what had happened. This, of course, affects the whole relationship. Red flag. I didn't blame her. I blamed myself, and it started affecting everything. We were later married, even up to the point of saying I do. I knew this was a mistake, and I shouldn't, but I believed in commitment, loyalty, and never quit. I truly believed we could put this behind us. She was younger, but she should learn from this. Red flag. And yes, it only got worse. I was deployed for field training exercises along with jumps on base. The operational tempo increased more, and we're seeing more deployments to multiple theaters at the time. When I returned from my duties on base, she would leave, and I wouldn't see her until 2 or 3 in the morning. Basically, when I started getting ready for the next day to leave for base. When this was happening, I was left alone with no transportation until she returned. The other incident, and the fact when I questioned her about what was going on, I would always get the same response. I am going to visit some friends up in the barracks. Red flag. If you remember when I met her, she went and gave a blowjob to the guy in the barracks that she didn't even know, and the incident at the bar. This was less than 2 months into our marriage. I thought that it couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. One weekend I brought up this issue, and I was not comfortable with her visiting her friends at the barracks, but she didn't know I knew about what happened with that one guy in my barracks since he worked in my same unit. I heard from him everything. My esteem was less and less as time went on because the other guy would show up for physical training and park next to me every morning. I approached her and she stated, "I need to take a shower." I knew she was avoiding this situation. This was not going away. She entered the bathroom and started taking her shower. I was wondering how to handle this. She was avoiding the issue. I decided to press her. I entered the bathroom and again stated I wasn't comfortable with what was going on and it needed to stop. This is the first time I ever dealt with what happened next. She rips open the shower curtain, glaring at me and screams at me, "Fine, I will just kill myself." Giant red flag. I was shocked, but I knew what this was. She was trying to manipulate me, and I left the bathroom, and I returned with a pair of scissors and told her, "Go ahead, do it in the shower so you don't make a mess." And I exited the bathroom. The behavior never stopped until one night she came in at 2:30 a.m. in the morning, and she found me sitting at the table. I told her to sit down, and I told her this is not working, and if you don't want to do this, that it was fine. I was ready to walk away. I had already gone to the Army lawyers to check on annulment of the marriage. Of course, Army lawyers are not there to help Salters just to cover the Army's ass. She decided that she didn't want it to end. At this time, I never quite understood it, but she changed what she was doing. But now, I know she just hid it better. Her behavior never stopped. Much later, I knew the only reason she stayed with me was my Army paycheck and benefits. It was around this time she divulged that she was pregnant. This issue with the pregnancy would cause issues because I truly believe to this day that this child was not mine. I love this little gift. The idea of leaving this little girl with this unstable woman gave me pause to stay. Child support. And the fact that I would never see my child. I heard of all the horror stories of fellow soldiers with kids. This was a no-win situation. I couldn't leave this little baby with this woman. Would she kill her when she was mad or just neglect her? I wanted that relationship with my child. Nothing seemed more important than protecting her. I had to stay. The price I paid is not even calculatable to this day. Deployments and training exercises came and went with that dread that maybe when I get back, my apartment will be empty and I will be victimized by this female. Would I ever see the baby again? The neglect of my focus on my duties and training began to take a toll on my advancement and status in the military. I was being passed over for promotions, and the resentment increased for the relationship. I was ultimately to blame, and I had to choose the Army or my child. It was time for re-enlistment, and I had to choose. I choose my child. I left the military and moved across the country with her and my child. This again will be important later. We arrived in a little town and was lined up for testing to become a police officer. I never made the training and testing date due to the traveling time. I started college and majored in criminal justice. I started college, but issues started again with her disappearing and not coming home while I took care of the little girl. I loved taking care of her. She was my world. I didn't have to deploy, training, and other things that took me away from her. She started going out with her coworkers to bars after work on the weekends and hanging out at her friend's house before and after work. The same things I believed was going on was happening, and I sought possible separation and divorce. Again, I was at that decision. She threatened to take my child away from me, destroy any chance of a career in law enforcement by false allegations. At this point in the relationship, I was still the main provider paying all the expenses while trying to pay for college. She was contributing nothing. Where was her money going? Never saw a penny. She never paid for anything, and my resentment was building. Out of the blue, she states, I have to leave, or it will destroy me. I didn't understand at the time what she was implying, but all of the things that she was involved with was forcing her to choose. She decided to move out of state, and she was taking the little girl. Yes, that was a mistake. I made a lot of mistakes at this point, and my stupidly helped her accomplish this on my birthday. After all of this, I couldn't believe I did what I did. I ended up quitting my job in school to follow her to another state. She had informed me things would be different, and that when I got there, things would be perfect. I just really wanted to be with my daughter, to protect her, to be involved with her, and not be allowed visitation when it benefited her, and to pour salt in a wound to pay child support on top of this. Before I got there, I was told that I had 30 days to find a place to live due to temporary housing. When I got there, as I was climbing out of the car, I was told I had a few days to find a place. She lied. When I was apart from her, I had saved a lot of money, but it was spent setting up a new residence and expenses in a new state. I found employment and then was offered a better job, and of course I quit and started working nights. I loved it. I was there by myself, and I had my days to myself and didn't have to deal with anybody else. I thought the worst was over. It was 2 months later she informs me, I am moving out. You're on your own. She took my child. I chased this lady over 2,400 miles, quit my job, my school, found another job, paid for all the expenses, and new residence. She does this. At this point, I was confused. Later, I find out she was seeing someone else. I believe she tried to move in with him, and he refused after telling me she was moving out. It was a month later, and she wanted to reconnect and moved back in, and the lease was up. I found another place. It was a lot nicer and a little bit more a month. I loved it. It was my castle. I was happy with this place. I re-entered college again and working towards my criminal justice degree with a minor in accounting, hoping for a job in forensics, accounting, and law enforcement. While starting college, I found another job with the local sheriff's department, and I could see opportunities. Of course, training and the hours were a lot. The stress was intense and the hours long, but it was rewarding. I started to have problems with depression and anxiety, and the financial issues that had plagued me was solved due to the fact that my income was doubled from the other employment, yet I was still paying all the expenses. During the time I worked at the sheriff's department, I began to suffer in silence due to depression, and I sought help. I made a mistake. I divulged this information to her, and it was later used as manipulation to get financing from my family to secure a house. A short time later, we moved from our little duplex to another residence, a house with a little acreage. I really didn't like the house, but I liked the location and the land. It brought a special kind of peace to me. There was less noise, darker nights without all the city light, yet the occasional hum from the nearby highway, which provided a little reassurance of not being so isolated. After some issues at work, I was let go from the department and my income fell to nothing, except unemployment and my retirement. I sought to find other employment but couldn't secure employment. While I was personally struggling with everything, I received only scrutiny and no real support from her, and I couldn't talk with her about it either. I had no objective person I could really talk to for finding a solution to this issue. The decision was made to leave for another state to find employment and training, and in early May, I set out to the new city and arrived in the other city and stayed at my brother's house, temporary, while looking employment. Never, at any point in my life, had I never had a bad attitude in a job ever, and never really called in for nothing. But at this point, I didn't really care about it. I never got any support. We had expenses, and they were very tight, yet never ever got support financially from her. She continued to spend the money she earned however she felt, yet all my money went to car payments, storage fees, electric, gas, car insurance, and food. Money was tight. Eventually, they let me go due to call off. I just hated the whole situation. I found another job and stated I would stay there for a year, and again, I worked alone for the most part. People left alone and it was nice. Later I found a place, but things got worse. Later I found out about her alcohol and drug use. I also found out about possible cheating too, with my brother. I didn't want to believe he would do it, but I never pursued it. The defining truth was that one night she came home late and she asked me if she was fugly. I don't think I answered her. I just looked at her and didn't respond. It only cemented the fact that she was trying to cheat on me again. The biggest turning point I had was when I was working and came across a book about depression. It was a thin, concise book, and this led me on my path of my own recovery. The book opened my eyes to some of my behaviors, how my choices were being made, and I need to start focusing on me because I knew I wasn't the only thing wrong in the relationship. This was July when I stumbled onto the book, but there were other books in the series, and I read them. Things started making sense in my life, but I knew there was work to be done. One of the first things I did was sit down and admit I had some problems and I needed help, and my life was not being managed. At that time, it was a beginning, and I started reading and gaining knowledge. Yet this is when I realized something was majorly wrong. It was later I learned a big part of what was wrong was me, and I entered recovery. I switched focus. It was no longer only her and the family. Things at home and the relationship began to unravel. I had a major blowout on the 4th of July with her. My family usually does something on the holidays, and it usually involves in building something or maintaining it. During this holiday, we were putting up a metal shed for storage. Since my other family was returning to the city from the other one, we had left, and needed additional storage. We'd finished putting the building up, and we decided to grab some meat and barbecue. I remember there was a container of baked beans at home, and I went back to house to get it, and I returned. About 20 minutes later, she comes storming into the backyard, and at that time I had never witnessed her being that aggressive and verbally abusive. I had enough of it, and I lashed out and told her how it was, and she backed off. I do believe if I hadn't let her know to stop that behavior, I would have been attacked physically. It was about 3 weeks later, I had decided I needed to get out of that job and settled into the idea of gaining other training. I went to a major vocational technology center to inquire about it. When I went in for testing, she decided that she wanted to go, and it wasn't fair that I was going to go and receive this other training. At that time, she was working at a major university as a patient representee and was having problems with it. I didn't know the extent, but later I would uncover paperwork and other evidence which should have put her in prison. It was after I had decided to attend and was making arrangements to attend. I knew something was going on, and at this time I had finally grew strong enough to act. I came home to find her sitting outside. I got out of the car and walked over. She stated something to the fact that she wanted to move out. I said, "Oh, that's funny because I was going to kick you out today." She was dumbfounded with my statement. I was finally sick of her behavior and wasn't going to put up with it anymore. She packed some of her belonging and took my kids with her. She took my kids. This is one of the biggest regrets I have. I let her take my kids, but I wasn't strong enough. Yet it happened. One of my worst painful events of my life happened. It was a week later. She said she was going back to the other city with the kids, and I let her do it. I never knew the true meaning of weeping, but that day I wept because I wasn't strong enough, and I let it happen again. After she and the kids were gone for a couple of weeks, the calls started to increase, and that she really wanted me to come up there. And this is when I heard a statement, and it set off red flags. When she said this, alarm bells went off. She said, "When you get her, it's going to be perfect when you get here." I heard this when I drove halfway across the country the first time, and only got there and was forced right away to save the day with my resources. I knew something was up, and I played along. During the time of these calls, I continued with my recovery. I realized the biggest issue in the relationship was me. I let things happen that I shouldn't, and I regret letting happen due to my weakness and the fact that I let her violate my boundaries. I had to work on myself. I turned introspective and read and started looking to my own needs instead of trying to meet hers. She was no longer my focus. It was only me and my children. During this time, I was still working to complete my promise to stay at this employer for the year and continue to learn my new trade at school. The year passed, yet I looked at the situation and I decided I needed to stay there due to the information of tuition assistance through work. It would help me immensely to complete school. School was progressing very fast and I was learning a lot, and it was about the time I would need to look for an entry-level job for the career field, which would double or triple my income. The tuition reimbursement was denied, and I inquired, and they told me it wasn't in the same category of my current position, and it wasn't approved for assistance. During this time, I also received my pay raise also, but there was a mistake in which the rate should have been higher, and I asked them about that. They stated, "Well, the state gave you a 50-cent raise, and we just gave you that instead of the 10 cents per hour that you would have received." I asked them, "Why didn't you give me the 60 cents? They stated, "We gave you 50 cents. I told them, "So you're basically stealing 10 cents from me per hour." Of course, they didn't see it that way, but I did. This was also within the same week they refused my tuition assistance, in which I was counting on. I informed the administration of the issues, and they agreed, but came back with what they said and couldn't do anything about it. It really bothered me. I made a rash decision. I wrote my resignation, including the reason why, and handed in my keys and walked out. I never really stood up for myself. In that way, I felt cheated, I felt wronged, and staying there only would grow my self-hatred of weakness. No more. I went home and started packing up the residence to be placed in storage to move back up to that state. I saw it was time to go up. The notices were giving out. I withdrew from school and I moved up to the other city. It was only a couple of days that I received some paperwork from DHS child support of that new state. I was shocked at the reason. It said I had abandoned my family, which wasn't even remotely true. She left with the kids voluntarily. This was the first time dealing with the inequality of government interference with families and demonizing of men without any information or evidence, just the accusation of a female. This situation was canceled when she went and stated I was with them now and that I was no longer employed. Before I left the other state, she stated I would have to find a day job and that I wouldn't be allowed to work nights anymore, which restricted any employment. During this time, my youngest was only 4 years old, and I felt unsure and that he wasn't being looked after appropriately. And it was confirmed of how he was being treated and cared for. This incident showed the attitude and serious situation of what was happening when this other person was taking care of him. There was another child. Her nickname was Peanut Butter, and she had gotten into a dishwasher detergent pod. The child was eating it. I was there, and how he reacted confirmed that I could not leave my kid with him. The conditions of the living area were not good. I couldn't believe what I did. I quit and moved here, but I couldn't give up. But this was my real last go. It was a couple of weeks later, and she was pressuring me to get another place to live, and I informed her, who will rent to someone without employment and any deposit or a way to pay rent? She obviously thought I would save the day this time, and I refused to play my hand. I didn't let her know of my finances and kept it that way. She didn't know I could, but I was watching and waiting to see the situation. A short time later, everything started to show, and I noticed and was preparing to leave. Our family met with her parents for breakfast, and the mother noticed how sluggish and lethargy she, along with slurred speech. It was later revealed she had taken an overdose of medication to kill herself. To me, this was another stunt. This has happened before, and I never reacted to her plea to her victimhood. She was taken to the hospital and placed in the mental ward. She remained there for 3 days and she was placed on medication. During her release, the doctor had brought me in and to met with both of them. The doctor said that she was not to drink alcohol while taking this medication to adverse affects. My response was, "Tell her not me. She won't listen to me." The doctor looked as if I didn't care, and I told her again. The same day, she was released from the ward and we returned to the place we were staying. This situation was unbelievable. She asked me, "Do you mind if I go over and watch hockey with a friend?" I was shocked, and I couldn't understand. She had been away for 3 days in a mental ward, away from the family, and she wants to go over to a friend's house to watch hockey. I called her out on this. Who is this friend? Why wasn't I invited? Why don't I know this friend? And do you think this is appropriate for a married woman to go over to another person's house who is a male without her husband? And I stated, "You want to go over and fuck him." And no, you can't. The other family members reacted the same way when she went to try to gain support for her position, and her family sided with me. It was at this moment that I knew I had to leave. That night, I went to the gas station to pre-trip the car for the trip back to another city. While I was pre-tripping the vehicle, I pulled something in my back and I could hardly walk. The task was completed and I returned back and started gathering my belongings and packing them up for the trip back. I didn't let on. The plan was that I was going to drive her to work and return to pack up the vehicle with our belongings and the kids to leave. I was furious, but it didn't end up like that. The next morning, I couldn't move. I couldn't get to my feet to drive her to work. She had to drive herself into work. Later that morning, I went to the hospital for my back. I got some medication and a shot. It helped, but I could barely walk still. Due to this injury, the plan was moot, and I waited. I received a phone call around 2 p.m. from her, and she said she was going to be late since she was stopping by the mall to pick up a birthday presents for my nephew. I said, okay. When she didn't return by 6:30 p.m., I grew concerned, but I had my suspicions what was going on. She lied. The ironic thing was that she believed she would get away with this, and I would take it like all the other times. Wrong. I received a phone call from an unknown man, and he asked if I was the husband of her. I said yes. He stated that she was drunk and need a ride home. I said he was mistaken because my wife was at the mall getting a present and would be home. He confirmed her name. I told him to stick her ass in a cab. She has money. I never knew this, but I went from laying on the hard floor to a standing position with my ailing back. I screamed at my daughter to pack her shit and her little brothers and to get ready, we're leaving. The others in the house looked panicked. You're leaving. I left and returned with the vehicle and found it about half a mile from the bar where she was drinking with that person who invited her to watch hockey. I never saw him, but I didn't blame him. I blamed her. She finally got caught, and I am not tolerating it. While waiting for her, I was taken to the city to look for the car, which was still parked there since she was put in a cab. During the time I was gone, she arrived and was told later that when she got back, she was out of control and she was taken to the hospital and sedated. When I returned with the car, I packed up and left and drove all night back to the other city with my children, keeping my promise to myself. This happened on Tuesday. By Thursday, I was back in school and employed. I had left her a letter and not to contact us for a while. She called later, begging and pleading. Of course, I didn't want to talk with her and told her if you want to talk to the kids, you can, but I am not talking to you. I never got an apology or an explanation. She knew I wouldn't accept it. When I returned to the other city, I continued to focus on my recovery and focus on my life instead of our life. It was over, and I was glad. After a few months, I got weak and lost focus. I still wanted the relationship to work, and of course, I wanted the children to have a mother and father in their lives full time. I was fooling myself, lost again, but slowly worked on my recovery. It is also worth noting that the focus slowly was back on her and the relationship. I finally finished school, finishing in the top 1% of my class, which was a major accomplishment for me. Yet, it was very short-lived by events and bad decisions. I remained separated from her, with the kids staying with me. When I was available, she was able to see them, and of course lost my anger and wanting to forgive her. She lived in a different apartment, a small studio, about 10 minutes away, and would visit her. One day she asked me, if we got divorced, you would still be friends with me. And I stated, no, I can't do that. This, of course, stunned her for my complete honesty and directness, in which I haven't been with her. It was later I found out about more drug use, crack this time, and that she was trying to monkey branch out of our relationship. The guy was a drug dealer and became impregnated by him. This was the time I really called it quits and wrote her out of my life. I had no respect for her. When I found out about the pregnancy, I told her, I am not raising another man's kid, and I walked out of the room. The continued disrespect and betrayal took a toll on me, but it wasn't just that. It was the fact that I kept staying in this relationship with her, allowing this to happen and allowing her to abuse me. This was the beginning of the end, and I knew it. Later, I found out she had a miscarriage, which I found sad, but glad it did happen to her due to the fact I may be held liable for another man's baby. That was something I didn't want. Again, I moved back in with her. I couldn't believe I was doing this. I still can't believe I let this continue. I thought maybe we could fix things, but of course it didn't. It got worse. The sexual relationship was less than desirable. I felt awful. I felt trapped. I was self-sabotaging myself and I knew it. It wasn't going to get better, but I still had to try. Maybe this time she would see the value in us as a family. It was my son's birthday, and not 30 minutes before she informed me she wanted to move out. I knew her games by now. I showed no emotion about it. I knew she wanted to be the victim, to have a public showing of how awful I was. Thankfully, due to my recovery and work on informing myself, I knew most of the games she would do, and right on cue, she tries to play me. It didn't work. It backfired, and she couldn't believe it. After the party, she decided to stay in the empty room and not sleep in our bed, and that was fine. When I was checking on her, I found her naked, masturbating with the laptop camera on. I wasn't completely shocked, but as usually, it was my fault. I knew better. One night I told her, if you don't want to be with me, leave. You have 20 minutes to decide, and I will drive you where you want to go. She decided to leave, and I filed for divorce later. It was during this time when I found paperwork for a psychologist diagnosing her as borderline personality disorder. This just confirms what I suspected all along. During the time I was separated, I read up on BPD, and this disorder is often misdiagnosed because insurance companies know there is no cure and the therapy lasts about 3 years with multiple visits to the doctor with a lot of medication. The misdiagnosis is bipolar disorder, and this should be a warning to other people dealing with these people. As always, I was painted in a negative manner. A protective order was applied for, but was denied due to no evidence. Yet I had to appear in court. The ability to know what was coming was no relief, and of course the other allegation of sexual abuse came. I knew it. She was out to destroy me, and she failed. She ostracized my oldest against me, and working on my son right now. She wants to be the victim, and she claims that I abused her physically. That, of course, is false, and I told her so. I told her, if I hit you, I am not going to stop because I am already guilty per court bias. She continues to taunt me today. It's been almost 10 years since our divorce. Today, I am doing okay. Completed my associate's degree, been working for the same company for 10 years. I love my life. I have no desire to have a female in my life. I did my time. Now it's my time, and I love it.